great to have you back, Captain Hill. In our previous discussion, we talked about active managerial control, and I know you emphasized that the concept is more than just knowing the requirements or rules. It's about actively applying them. Could you elaborate on why that hands-on approach is so crucial?
Absolutely, Maria. Active managerial control is built on two key principles. Number one, demonstration of knowledge. That is having a solid understanding of foodborne illnesses and the underlying risk factors that contribute to foodborne illnesses. And number two is performance of duties. That is actually putting that knowledge into practice through training, monitoring, and corrective action. I really want to get across the point that knowledge of food safety requirements alone is not enough. Supervisors must provide consistent training, monitoring, and corrective action in order to foster a culture of active managerial control to significantly reduce the risk of a foodborne illness outbreak.
That makes sense. Just having an awareness or knowing the requirements or rules isn't enough if there's no follow-through.
Exactly. Demonstration of knowledge and performance of duties are key concepts to achieving active managerial control. Supervisors and managers need to go beyond simple awareness. They must train their teams regularly, monitor food safety practices in real time, and step in when corrective action is needed. This type of consistent engagement is what creates a strong food safety culture and significantly lowers the risk of a foodborne illness outbreak.
That's a great perspective. Can you break down the 5 key risk factors and help us understand how to tackle them effectively?
Surely, let me go through each of the 5 risk factors and what needs to be done to address them from both a knowledge and a duties perspective. So number one is improper food holding temperatures, time, temperature abuse. This is a big one. Time and temperature are our most effective tools for controlling the bacterial pathogens and preventing a foodborne illness outbreak. So knowledge here means that you have an understanding of the microbiology of bacterial foodborne pathogens and their growth requirements and conditions and how to control them. Now, duties involve ensuring cold foods requiring refrigeration are held at the proper temperature, and that's 41 degrees Fahrenheit or 5 degrees Celsius or below. And foods displayed or stored hot are held at the proper temperature, that is 135 degrees Fahrenheit or 57 degrees Celsius or higher. It also means having a knowledge of how to properly cool foods using the 2-stage cooling process, where you start from 135 degrees Fahrenheit or 57 degrees Celsius, and you go down to 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 degrees Celsius within 2 hours. And then the second stage, you go from 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21 degrees Celsius down to 41 degrees Fahrenheit or 5 degrees Celsius or below within the next 4 hours. Next, for knowledge, we're talking about date marking and date marking for refrigerated ready to eat foods. So these foods must be properly date marked and discarded within the required regulatory time frame. For example, the VSP, the Vessel Sanitation Program, allows 7 days, but your cruise company policy may enforce a shorter time frame, like a 5-day limit. So it's also important to remember that food items that require date marking must meet 4 criteria. And the first criteria is it requires refrigeration. It must be stored at cold temperatures for safety. The second criteria, number 2, is it has to be ready to eat. is consumed as it is. There's no further cooking. And number 3, it has to be what we call a potentially hazardous food, or a TCS food, time temperature control for food safety. It has to support harmful bacterial growth if not properly managed. And the 4th criteria is if it's held beyond 24 hours, it has to be date marked. Less than 24 hours, it doesn't have to be date marked if it's going to be consumed, used within 24 hours. But more than 24 hours, it definitely has to be date marked. So the key takeaway here is about knowledge and duties. Knowledge means understanding that some bacterial pathogens can grow even at cold temperatures. That's why it's your duty to properly date mark and discard these foods before they become a risk and cause illness. So next, under knowledge, under risk factor number 1, revolves around using time as a public health control. So if you're using time, once food is removed from temperature control, there are strict procedures that must be followed. So knowledge involves understanding microbiology and the 4-hour rule, a very important concept. This is the point where bacteria can reach a level where they can make someone sick. And duty here means ensuring these foods are discarded within 4 hours to prevent illness. So that's risk factor number 1. So our next risk factor number 2, revolves around poor personal hygiene. So knowledge for this risk factor revolves around, again, microbiology and the spread and control of foodborne pathogens, including bacteria and viruses, primarily related to hands. Duties would include ensuring employees practice proper hand washing and do not contact ready-to-eat foods with bare hands. They use single-use gloves properly, they wear clean outer clothing, effective hair restraints, and otherwise practice good personal hygiene. So that's our second risk factor. Let's move on to risk factor number 3, and it's entitled Contaminated Equipment, Lack of Protection from Contamination. So knowledge, again here, revolves around an understanding of microbiology and the concept of cross-contamination, that is, transferring pathogens from one food or surface to another. Duties include ensuring food is protected from cross-contamination during storage, preparation, and display. This involves sneeze guards or sneeze shields, arranging and covering food stored in refrigerators, separating raw and cooked foods, and other practices depending on the specifics of that operation. So when it comes to food contact surfaces, duties would include ensuring these surfaces are properly cleaned and sanitized. They're cleaned to sight and touch and properly stored to prevent contamination. So that's risk factor number 3. Our next risk factor, number 4, is entitled inadequate cooking. So knowledge for this risk factor revolves around microbiology and the different cooking temperatures to destroy foodborne pathogens. Supervisors have a duty to ensure raw animal foods are cooked to the required temperature. Employees are trained and use appropriate thermometers to do that properly. For cooked foods that are reheated, there is a duty to ensure they are reheated to the required temperature, that's 165 degrees Fahrenheit or 74 degrees Celsius, in less than 2 hours. Many people think that if they have temperature abused a food, they can just reheat it and make it safe again. But this is incorrect. Reheating may kill the bacteria, the vegetative cells, but reheating may not destroy the toxins or the spores the bacteria may produce. So a good understanding of microbiology is important as far as knowledge is concerned. So moving on, our last risk factor, we want to make sure that foods are sourced from approved suppliers. So it's called food from unsafe suppliers. And for this last risk factor, supervisors need knowledge of where foods come, if the source is approved by law or not. They have a duty to ensure foods are obtained from approved sources. And approved sources include manufacturers or suppliers that are licensed or permitted, and when applicable, inspected by regulatory authority. For fresh produce, growers and their suppliers need to follow good agricultural practices, GAPs, and good manufacturing practices, GMPs. And remember, home canned or home prepared foods are not permitted.
This has been an incredibly informative discussion. Before we close, do you have any final recommendations for food safety professionals aiming to enhance their compliance efforts?
Well, there is another risk factor that's been in the news lately, and that number 6, that is called a negative food safety culture. So you want to have a positive food safety culture, but that's a topic for another time.
Yes, yes, next time. As you pointed out, fostering a culture of active managerial control and a positive food safety culture can significantly reduce the risk of foodborne illness outbreaks. We appreciate your time and look forward to welcoming you back for more discussions on public health essentials, no matter where your journey takes you.
Thanks you.